Hello and welcome to the Symmetry Sessions podcast. I'm your host, Heather McPaul. Join me for in-depth, down-to-earth, and casual conversations about all things healthy, wealthy, and wise. We delve into topics related to therapy, mental health, relationships, business, and more with guests from all walks of life. And even though I am a professionally licensed counselor, this is just a show, and the information presented is just for informational, educational purposes only. It's definitely not meant to replace getting professional help from a doctor or a therapist. So please seek that help from a qualified healthcare professional if you need it. And if it is an emergency, please call 988 or other appropriate emergency services. I'm very excited to bring to you a variety of amazing guests and topics. So let's get started with today's episode. Welcome to the Symmetry Sessions. Joining me here today is Sarah Temel. She's a personal growth consultant, IFS practitioner, and certified apprentice through the Forrest Center for Evolutionary Astrology, and owner of Window Within. And she's here to talk to me about IFS-inspired astrology. Hi.
Hi. Thanks for
How
having me.
are you? Yes, thank you for coming and sharing your time with us to help, me understand, as well as other people out there, what all of this is. And I guess the first place I want to start is talking about IFS, because even though I've talked about it in previous episodes for the people that are just tuning in, I'm always interested to hear how other people explain IFS. So, how do you explain IFS? What the fuck is that?
Yeah. So I look at IFS as it's a way of looking at our lived experiences through different parts. And some of those parts, just because of what's happened to them in life, have taken on extreme or burdened roles. But that through the IFS healing process, there is a way to kind of reclaim what is innately good in all of our parts. So I think it just gives us a more complex lens of what's actually happening within ourselves and within other people. That's a
Yeah,
very
and it's
short way to explain it, but
yeah, I know, I like it. I usually explain it in that it's a way of looking at our subconscious mechanisms and impulses and survival modes.
yeah.
And historically, it's a therapeutic approach um, to counseling and whatever. But what you're doing is something very different with it. And so, first of all, before we get into the merging of those things, what the fuck is evolutionary astrology?
So evolutionary astrology is it's basically a branch of astrology that really focuses on karmic patterns. So like why do you have the birth chart that you have? Something happened in a prior lifetime. Now you've come here in this lifetime to work through those lessons. Um, so evolutionary astrology is looking at like what are you growing out of and what are you striving to grow into, which is usually the harder part.
So, how do you put IFS and evolutionary astrology together in the work that you do?
So basically, I bring the IFS lens to astrology. So in IFS, there is that saying like there's no bad parts, every part has a positive intention. So I bring that piece of the IFS lens when looking at the birth chart, right? Like there's no bad planets, you're not doomed because of this or that. And then we use the IFS parts work and healing process in order to help people kind of move towards what their soul is here to grow into and kind of be a cycle breaker of the past life pattern.
So that's an interesting segue. Um, the word doomed. um, because if you've ever listened to any of this show, there's at least one episode where I go on a rant about spiritual bypassing.
Yes.
And for those that don't know what spiritual bypassing is, the way that I explain it is that religion or spiritual practices or beliefs are used as a way to bypass actually doing deeper work. And one of the things that I've noticed in some of the community that subscribes to, you know, the understanding of sun signs and birth charts and things like that is that, like, well, that's just who I am, right? So, like, I'm just an Aquarius and that's why I'm the way that I am. And that can be such a spiritual bypassing way of looking at these things. But it seems like with IFS, you're not allowing that. That's not the right word, but you're helping them understand that that's not true.
Yes,
Is that
absolutely.
right? Yeah.
That is right. And actually, so I feel like a lot of pop astrology, or like, in the old days, like newspaper astrology, was very kind of like fortune telling, or describing like you have these fixed traits about you because of the time that you were born. But actually, like in modern astrology, and the deeper that you go into learning about all of this, it's really not so. Each sign represents like a multitude of potential ways that this could go. So there's always a higher expression or a higher path of a sign, and then more like a shadow expression. So to me, that's actually why the IFS works so well with that, because say you are an Aquarius and you're just like stubborn and you're going to do everything your own way no matter what. And I'm not talking about you, Heather. Um, but we can,
Aquariuses weren't ever explained to me that way, but that's a pretty good assessment of me.
yes, actually, it is a very Aquarian thing. But we can look at that now like, oh, like, are you kind of more in the shadow of Aquarius? And if so, IFS kind of gives the answer of like, all right, like, how would we unburden that so
Mm.
that you can be a more self-led, you can live through your chart in a more self-led way.
So trauma creates the shadows.
Trauma can create the shadows. Generational trauma can create the shadows. Yeah,
Come down a rabbit hole with me for a second.
I'd love to.
I was talking to a client the other day and kind of giving him a briefing on trauma as being, you know, um, it changes our DNA and that kind of thing. But he said to me, we were talking about like nature versus nurture. It's not an either or, it's a both thing. And he was like, yeah, but like if it's passed down in the DNA, it came from an environmental experience. So it's all environmental. And my head kind of busted open for a minute.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It is a good point. So I guess, it's interesting to think about like how things are passed on. And I know in IFS, they have a whole nother, and I don't know if this is like going too far, but they have an understanding that you can legacy burdens, right? The
Hmm.
passing down of traumatic things, and not just in your DNA, but in what's modeled for you and then replicated in
Right.
terms of behaviors and relationships and whatever. Um, but in IFS, they also talk about critters.
Hmm.
You know about critters?
Yeah.
Does evolutionary astrology explain that, or is that just a weird thing?
Well, I never thought about it so much in terms of critters. Although, like, as I'm thinking about it now, I could see like there are certain chart placements that indicate that a person may or may not, right? It depends if they've tuned into this capacity, but may or may not have the ability to connect more to spiritual realms or other
Yeah, yeah.
uh,
So the
non
reason why I'm
ordinary reality.
yeah I'm asking because the term critters in IFS is sort of a spiritual uh, idea, I guess, that there are some forces in the universe that might attach themselves in a negative way to people. I've never heard of positive critters, but
I
um,
think they call those guides.
oh, okay,
Yeah.
yeah. And because evolutionary astrology feels more in the spiritual realm, I was wondering if
Yeah.
you yeah, had an explanation or whatever.
So yeah, I think the way that evolutionary astrology would look at it is probably more through a karmic past life lens.
Oh, I see.
Right, like
Like
there's
you did
intergenerational
something bad.
trauma. Yeah, well, more that there's intergenerational or interlifetime trauma that you're still working to resolve, right? And that there's a reason that you're born at a specific day and time so that your soul can continue to work on the trauma healing from past lifetimes.
Oh, I see. So it takes that idea and that saying of you repeat what you don't repair on a multi-life level.
Yes. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
that's perfect. I'm gonna steal that. That's it.
You're welcome.
Yeah. I love it.
Yeah, because well, it's interesting that people would have to come back to continue. I mean, one of the IFS does get a little bit into the, if you go deep enough, it does go into the spiritual realm.
Yeah.
And what was I going to say? Uh, and they do talk about like self energy being a conduit, but also connected to whatever it is out there in the universe, the source, God, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
Um, and it's interesting that we may not be able to resolve within one lifetime, uh, and probably because parts of us don't want us to, or don't want to feel or go there. And so you come back to do it again. Oh, so what I was going to say is like the idea that we are the universe experiencing itself.
Mm.
Uh, and then have you ever seen, there was a, not a meme, but like a graphic online, and it was like, this is what a brain synapses looks like. And then it was next to that picture was an image of the universe, and it looks exactly the
Mm.
same.
Oh, that's
And,
beautiful.
and so the idea that we are parts of a bigger brain.
Yes. Yeah, right. And that in all of our lifetimes, like our little, it's like the micro and the macro, right? Like the particle and the wave form, that we're all like living through a human experience, but we're actually collectively living through something much, much greater than ourselves. And I think, yeah, I look at self as it is this like transpersonal, something much bigger. And then
Mhm.
we can have a personal window of access to that within ourselves as well in order to kind of work with our little piece, right? Our little slice
Yeah,
of
yeah.
the human experience.
So tell me more. I'm going to back up. Tell me more about the birth chart and what that helps people understand.
Yeah, so the birth chart, it's basically an astrological, not an astronomical, but an astrological snapshot of the sky at the moment you were born. And how it can help people is that it gives a very complex overview of what your soul is here to work on. Um, so like I feel like in pop psychology and things like that, like we try to type people into like, you're an Enneagram 4, or
Blech.
you're this little thing. What I love about the birth chart is that it's very complex and there are relationships between different parts of you. Um, there are supportive relationships, there are challenging relationships. Your birth chart also serves as kind of, it's your map, but at the same time there's timing to it. So like things that are happening when you're 12 years old are going to be impacting you in a different way than when you're 26 years old or when you're 30 years old. So it's like cycles of timing that impact you as well.
Hmm. So, what are you able to tap into in order to help people with that?
Yeah. So, well, as an evolutionary astrologer, I like to start with kind of the past life pattern. So there's what they call the chart behind the chart, which is reading the chart in a past life lens. And that sort of explains the soul's past predicament, but it also typically describes the current predicament, right? If you're taking a retest on something, it's going to look a little bit like the test you just took, right? Because you're trying
Oh, sure.
right, like get a different result this time. So we can look at the past life patterns. A lot of times there's like an indication of like there was a misstep here, or like your relationships really got in the way last time. So let's be more conscious of that this time. Or there's like a mother wound from the past that you're carrying into this lifetime. So all of that is really helpful in just like looking at kind of a theme of a pattern. We can't exactly say like you were, a knight in the 1700s, but we could tell a story in that way that would get to the heart of the issue, right? So like it feels kind of like this or like that. And then using the north node, it kind of points the compass towards what is the medicine for that cycle.
Hmm.
Um, yeah.
Because I was going to ask you, okay, so they have the map, right? There's a map of all of the things,
Mm-hmm.
past, present, whatever, and it points to what needs work. What do they do with that map? What are they supposed to do with that map after? How do they do?
What do they do with this?
Yeah, what do they do with
Well,
it?
well, I feel like that's where working with someone that really understands the language comes in. Um, because most of the consultation clients that I have, it's not like they already have like a deep understanding of the language. So I'm kind of there as a translator. Um, but maybe like I'll give you an example from a session I was doing this morning. We were just looking at a moon Venus aspect that's in her chart. Um, and so ahead of time, I came up with like a guided IFS meditation that focuses on parts of us that really seek peace in relationships, sometimes to the detriment of ourselves. So it's going in then, right, and using the IFS process to connect with the client's lived experience of what the symbols in the chart indicate. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay. I feel like it's a lot of words.
There's just there's just so much. It just feels so complex. I guess I want to ask this question, and it isn't to like be an asshole. How do we know that the alignment of stars and planets and whatever has any effect or bearing on human existence?
I mean, how do we know? Honestly, I don't even ever ask that question because when I'm looking at it as a tool for self reflection. So if
Mhm.
I'm getting something out of it, that's the evidence that I need that this is a useful tool for self reflection for me or for
Mhm.
this person, who might be resonating with it. Um, I also like, I don't look at the planets in the sky like, oh, like Mercury's in retrograde. So
Oh
now
my god.
it's going to be beaming down chaos. Like actually, symbolically, like, sure, those things can happen during that time period. They happen a lot in my life anyway, um, but it's more about, oh, like the planet of cognition appears to be moving backwards. Moving backwards means covering ground it's already covered. What do I need to revisit? What should I be paying more attention to? Um, so to me, like, I feel like people ask that question a lot, but because astrology isn't a belief system for me,
Mhm.
it doesn't feel like an asshole question at all. I'm like, yeah, I don't know. It's a tool that I'm using
Right, I guess
to make
that's
sense of
yeah.
things. Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. Because I think that I look at tarot cards and oracle cards much the same way. It's not that these
Exactly.
cards are magically going to tell you some shit you didn't know, but it is going to allow your subconscious to make associations and identify with things in the card that mean something to you in your personal life. And if you can use those tools to be able to get more information. I mean, we use art the same way, right?
Yes.
To tap into that subconscious, um, and discover more about yourself. So, yes, okay, good. I get that.
Like I could get behind that.
Well, you're right. There's so much pop astrology, and I feel like a lot of that stuff is only getting worse through things like TikTok. I hate TikTok so much, and I've talked
It
about it
is
so many
getting
times.
worse.
Um, and of course, there are people out there that will over identify with certain labels as a means to have some kind of faux self.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, like to have an identity. Um, and I think that leads a lot of people to be like, "Oh, okay." But it's interesting that this is just a tool. And why wouldn't we use our natural environment to understand our world, inner
Right.
and outer world? Yeah.
Yeah. And astrology, I think what I was maybe starting to say before too is that astrology is not astronomy. So if there are certain systems that use the astronomical placement of the planets, but like most of the astrology that we see is based on seasons and equinoxes. And, when something's in Aries astrologically, it might not be in Aries astronomically at the moment. So it really is more of it's about cycles, it's about patterns. The
Mm,
12 signs and houses, they kind of flow in an evolutionary story, right? Where like Aries is like coming into birth, instance, fight or flight. Like, I'm going to have to figure out how to survive.
hmm.
Then when we get to Taurus, it's like, I'm going to have to figure out how to calm down after all of that surviving,
Mhm.
right? And then we get to Gemini, where it's like, okay, I've calmed down a bit. Now I'm going to start to think about things and like try to understand, like make connections in my environment. Once I've done that, we're going to move into Cancer or the fourth house. Now I'm starting to really feel a lot of stuff, right? I'm like getting deep into my root feelings. I mean, I won't go through all of it, but then we move into Leo and it's like,
You
okay, like,
could. I'm fascinated right now.
so we've felt a lot of our feelings in Cancer. And then when we move into Leo, we want other people to validate our feelings. It's like that child that's like, look at me, mom. Like, I want to be seen.
Mm,
Once we've gotten that supportive validation, we move into Virgo, which is like, okay, I've gotten the validation that I needed. And now I really want to help other people. I really want to be a person of integrity. I want to find meaningful work. I want to find, you know, just a way to improve as well. And then after we've done all of that in Virgo, we move into Libra that just wants to find some friends and a partner, and really work through those long term relationships and find balance. Once we've found our partners, we're going to move into Scorpio, where we're digging into like more or unconscious patterns, sexuality, intimacy, insecurity, all those fears that we face when we've like really gotten close with people, right? And gotten into the dirt. Once we've done all of that, we're going to move into Sagittarius or the ninth house, where it's all about higher learning, higher education, having experiences that broaden our horizons, right? So we faced all our fears in Scorpio. And now we're like, okay, like I need to move into the world, eat, pray, love, right? I'm going to go to India and
yeah.
I'm going to go like, once we've done all of that, we move into Capricorn or the 10th house. And now it's time to write the book about our experiences and do the big, great work. It's going to take a long time, but like this
Show
is
the
your,
world.
you're
Yeah.
going to create your legacy and show the world in the 10th house. And then after that, we move into the 11th house or Aquarius, where we really want to find our special groups of people. Are
Mm.
people that like have a shared agenda, like we're all in this same special mission together. And then from there, then it's like transcendence in Pisces. And like we've kind of reached a place of enlightenment, exploring different states of consciousness, all of that. But like as we're exploring different states of consciousness and everything, we begin to move back into areas where it's time to be born again. And it just, yeah.
Hmm. How long does a journey typically take for you working with someone like this? Like, what is it? There a protocol for sessions and things like that, or?
Um, well, I offer different types of sessions. Um, so some people are like new to the whole thing and they just want to kind of get a grasp on the birth chart or something that's happening in their relationship, that kind of thing. Or, what's going on for me this year or at this point. So those can be booked in like a 90-minute session. But for me, like the heart of the work is really finding folks that want to go on the deeper journey,
Mhm.
right? That kind of leave with the, okay, like I learned so much about myself, but like now what?
So you help people move through the houses as you describe them?
Well, I guess I feel like there's like a human pattern, right, to moving through the houses. But in everyone's chart, they're going to have more of an emphasis in certain signs and houses.
Gotcha.
And that means, so the signs represent like a motivation, and the house represents how it's going to be expressed either behaviorally or circumstantially in life. Um, so what I do with the clients that sign on to do like maybe a 6 week thing together or once a month for a while to kind of go deeper with it. We look at everything, and we kind of look at some parts are already going to be more self-led, right? If someone's done a lot of work on this, but there might be this other thing over here that like we haven't really looked at that. So we'll spend more time there. So just like with IFS, it's kind of like feeling out like which part are you most feeling
Mm,
called to work with?
yeah.
And then we use the astrology sort of as a tool to give more context, but a lot of the work is IFS work.
Yeah. How do you keep your, or not, your therapisting out of, how do you, because that's not the role that you're really, is it separate? I don't,
It is, to me, it's separate, very separate. Um, yeah, I feel like, and that's why I feel like it's actually good to see a therapist for coaching or consultation, because I can start to tell if it's like, oh, like this is like a really deeper unresolved trauma that hasn't been touched yet. It doesn't mean like, oh, if you've
mm,
had trauma, you can't do this kind of work with me. But if we're like having active flashbacks or completely dissociating, right? Things that,
right.
right, I would want to help that person like also connect with a therapist in order to do the deeper work.
Someone who isn't
Yeah.
you.
Yes.
Well, that makes sense.
Yeah. I'm like, ethically, yes, definitely
Yeah,
someone
yeah, yeah.
who isn't me.
So again, like I asked you this question before and then we got on this beautiful tangent, but like what makes how are you figuring this out for people? Like what are you tapping into? What how are you coming up? How do you know what the fuck the sky looked like the day someone was born?
Okay. So I don't personally create the map in my mind. Thank God there's technology for that. Um, it's based on the birth date, time, and location.
Mhm.
So I plug that into the astrology software, and boom, a birth chart is created for that person. Um, I think the hardest thing about learning astrology, and also part of why I love it, is that it is an ongoing journey of learning. There are so many different, there's all of the planets, all of the signs, all of the houses, all of the relationships between them. Um, but again, so what I really start looking at first is kind of like, where are they coming from? Where is their soul hoping to grow into? And then
Mm.
kind of what has gotten in the way of that so far.
So you're kind of like an interpreter.
Yeah.
Yeah, a spiritual interpreter.
Yes, an astrological spiritual interpreter.
Yeah. So you're taking the information because why how would they know what they were looking at? And then you're helping them understand it in the context of this blend of IFS and evolutionary astrology.
Hmm.
And then they're sort of consulting with you as they're, you know, targeting different things or
Yep.
working through stuff. Huh. And so I'm assuming you've had your own birth chart done.
Yes, I have.
And did you see this coming? Like, did
I
you
did
know that
not.
not literally, but like that you would be doing that house that is like, okay, now I'm here to help people in this way.
Actually, it's interesting because no, I didn't at all. And I've always had kind of like a consumer interest in astrology. Like, I remember getting like the sun sign books and the moon sign books for each year, like since I was 12 years old. Um, so I feel like I've always been a heavy consumer of astrology, and I have a friend who is an astrologer. And she was like, I could teach you this. Like, you would love this. Like, and there was just this part of my brain at the time that was like, this looks way too complicated. I'm like, I don't think that's for me. I don't think I'm going to be able to learn all of that. It's so much information and it's so complex. Um, and she did my birth chart, and it was like a really awesome, wonderful experience. But still, at the time, I wasn't like, okay, like this is going to be my thing now. Um, it's interesting because I actually came to this role through an IFS workshop.
Mm.
It was called Parts and Charts. And it was an IFS practitioner named Tara Vogel. She's actually based in Philadelphia, but she does like IFS and astrology coaching stuff with her clients.
Oh.
And she presented this workshop, and there was something about what she said, that the birth chart is like your soul's lesson plan. And something about that just really clicked for me. And she's like, the planet is a part of your psyche. The sign is how it's motivated. What does this part of you want? And then the house is how does it get expressed, or what circumstances? So like, when does this part show up for you? And in that moment, it just clicked. I'm like, oh, okay, if there is a lesson plan for my soul, I'm like, I want to know all about it, because I keep looping in the same old stuff over and over. I'm like, I need to see this lesson plan. Who wrote this for me? Like, I'm going to take a
Hmm.
look at this. Um, yeah. And then I just went down a rabbit hole for like 2 years of a very intense studying and reading everything I could get my hands on, and doing the FCEA program. Yeah, it's been a whirlwind, but
Well, that's awesome.
beautiful. Yeah.
Um, yeah, I always find myself like caught between two parts, the part of me that's heavy logical and and the part of me that was born to be pagan, like uh and I do believe that, that there is something spiritual about doing the deeper work, because I do think that you are connecting. Well, I like Eckhart Tolle, and one of the things that I heard him say not too long ago was he was on a podcast called A Little Bit Culty. Have you heard of this podcast?
No, but I like the name.
Yeah, it's great. It's two former members of Nexium, and
Mm,
and I'll put that in the show notes because they're great. And they were interviewing Eckhart Tolle, and at the end, one of the hosts says to him, "Well, thank you for sharing your consciousness with us." And he said, "Well, it's your consciousness too." And
mm,
there was something about that I was like, yes, like we tap into this, what we say in IFS, this self-led energy, and it is what connects us to each other. Because if we
yes.
are really the universe experiencing itself, we are all really the same. And it's interesting because I was trying to explain to my best friend why I'm like, you need IFS, everybody needs IFS therapy. So I was trying to explain it to her, and there were parts of her that were getting stuck on the idea that self actually doesn't have an identity, is, you know,
Mm,
and that no parts have those bits of identity. It's parts that need to be labeled or called something or have a job or whatever.
right.
And that when we are in self, we are everything and nothing, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
Yep.
that was a tangent.
I love it though. If it is, I think it is sometimes hard for people to grasp. And I think, even like in astrology, when people kind of cling to like, well, I'm a Taurus and you're a Virgo, and like, it, it's just, right. Like, we're just like so focused on this little label of it that like we haven't, like, are you a self-led Taurus or Virgo? Because that's going to be like a
Hmm.
huge difference, right? And there's really nothing in the chart that is going to tell us about the condition of a soul as it's incarnated, right? Like, is this a higher level soul? Is this and I don't even love using the terms higher or lower, but like maybe a more spiritual soul, or more someone that has naturally more access to self energy. um but yeah, I think that it can be hard for us humans to kind of take off the glasses and see that larger picture that like
We are
there's
one.
there's
Yeah.
infinite oneness.
Yeah. So do you find that you're working with a particular type of demographic, or do you see people from all sort of spiritual, religious walks of life coming to understand these things?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I feel like there's not like one particular type of person. Um, I think just folks that are spiritually curious, like maybe that's the common
Mm.
denominator.
Hmm.
People that are spiritually curious, and again, like feeling like there's this pattern that maybe I have a lot of insight about, but for some reason it just hasn't moved.
Mm.
Um,
So it doesn't
so
necessarily have to be like if somebody was uncomfortable with the aspect of spirituality connected, sort of homegrown into this kind of work. You don't, I mean, just like in therapy, we don't bring it up unless it's important to you. You know what I mean?
right.
Um, I'm wondering if you help people navigate around some of maybe their parts are uncomfortable with it.
That's an interesting point. So, well, I think because it's very clear from like my website and my Instagram page that like this is a merging of these two things. Even if, I can act as the translator, but I still am going to, in doing this work, want to see a copy of your birth chart so that I can help interpret what's going on.
Well, I guess what I mean is like, because I know plenty of Christian people who will go to a psychic. You know what I
Right,
mean?
right. Hmm.
So there is some flexibility. I don't know what my question is really. Like, I guess in therapy, we always say, like, we'll ask about spirituality or religion as, what your preference is, if any, just because it can be strength for some people.
Right.
Um,
And it's also a meaning making mechanism. So I feel like that's important to know in therapy as well.
yeah, for sure. How do you view the world, right?
Hmm.
And what comes next and all of that.
Yeah.
Um,
Right. How do you make sense of what's happening in your life now?
I guess I just wonder if some people get to a certain point and they're like, I'm worried this is going in a woo woo area. You know?
Yeah. I mean, I have those parts too. I feel like my close friends are always hearing me say this. I feel like I'm like the most skeptical spiritual person. So I feel like sometimes I have like one foot in both worlds where I'm like, that feels a little hokey or like that's.
Yeah, I feel that.
Hmm.
Um, what
So
else would
I
you
welcome
go
those
ahead?
parts. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No. Right. I mean, I think the curiosity and leaning into the discomfort is always important, no matter what we're talking about. Um, Certainly, sometimes we have protective parts that don't want us to, I don't know, venture into that area for whatever reason. So
Yeah.
that's also something to think about.
Right.
Could be on the chart. Who knows?
It could be.
Um, what was I going to say? Oh, so what else is there to know about this type of work that we haven't covered already?
um I guess just that it can be a lifelong process. There might be times where
Mm,
like you do a piece of work on something and you feel like you've moved through it, and then, everything will continue to be cyclical in some ways, right? Like we're not here, I mean, this is my personal belief, but like we're not here to transcend while we're here on earth, right? So we're probably going to keep
mm.
going through different cycles.
I mean, I feel
Yeah.
like when I talk to people about IFS stuff, I'm always like, you're not going to wake up one day and be like, holy shit, I'm mindful, I'm self led, I'm done. You know what I mean? Like, it's always the practice is the point. And I think that, it'd be weird if we were self-led all the time, and we need parts to function in the world. And I always say that I think the only person that isn't like that is Eckhart Tolle, but like he's like a next level human being, and I don't think most people are going to
Right.
get to that place. Um, and you can just tell by the way that he talks. It's actually creepy and amazing at the same time. Um,
Creepy and amazing. I love that.
yeah, I mean, sometimes he's just so monotoned because he's so not reactionary, you
Hmm.
know? But and I do feel like some people are, and this is going in that spiritual weird realm, reborn to not have to work necessarily on their own stuff, but to help other people work on their stuff.
Yeah.
I think he's definitely one of those fucking people, but I feel like that's super rare, you know? And who
Yeah.
knows? I don't know the guy at home, you know? He could be totally bugging out. Who knows?
That's so true. It's interesting, right? Like our projections of people as well. No, I agree with you. I do think, there are kind of helper souls that incarnate to kind of be a guide for others. Um, so yeah, like it's lifelong work for most of us. Again, like there's timing and development involved as well. And to me, that just reflects the timing and development that happens naturally throughout the course of our lives anyway.
Mm.
Um, the other thing is too that, oh no, I lost my train of thought. It'll come back. I guess basically I'm thinking too in terms of like sometimes people have questions about like, is this relationship right for me? Or like, can I be with this person if they have this in their chart and I have this in my chart? Um, and to me, like the answer to those things is always going to fall back more on the IFS side of like,
Yeah.
well, I think that a self-led, Virgo can be with a self-led Aries or, whatever it is. So the whole goal really is just bringing more self energy to the chart. Um,
Mm.
oh, this is the other piece I was going to say. I also think it can be incredibly validating because even though if we really know ourselves, we know what a lot of our patterns and characteristics and like stuff is already. Um, but to see it sort of mirrored in the chart as like, oh no, like this was part of your soul's lesson plan can just be validating that like I'm not continuing to run into this because there's something that I haven't done right or that like I haven't, evolved enough.
Mm.
But that like, no, like this is going to be a theme that you're going to work through the rest of your life. And it might look differently when you first started working on it than it does now.
Yeah.
But, like we said, it's a lifelong journey and we'll continue that process.
Yeah. I One of the things that I love about IFS practitioners in general is the heavy emphasis that this is a lifestyle. You know,
Mm-hmm.
that we're not just on the therapy side, we're not just teaching people some fucking tools and going home and then not doing that. You know what I mean?
Right,
Like,
right.
there's a heavy emphasis in training that you are also in awareness and working with your own internal parts. And I imagine for the work that you do in Window Within, that you are also, um, you know, walking the walk and talking the talk.
Yeah, absolutely. To me, IFS is just a way of looking at the human experience, including very deeply my own experience as well. Um, yeah, and I feel like the birth chart and like the nodal story, which is like the past life story, moving into, like our that north node is like the north on the compass, right? Like what we're growing into. It's kind of nice to have a little map for my parts.
Mm-hmm. Could you don't have to, but would you be willing to talk about your own personal journey and like not in general, but like has there been a moment where, you know, there's been this aha moment or this um movement that this kind of work has helped you, specifically the evolutionary astrology stuff, like
Yeah.
helped you to navigate stuff in your own life, if that made any sense?
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. I feel like a big one for me, and this is probably why I'm so called to the evolutionary astrology lens, learning about my past life karmic pattern and what my soul really wants to grow into, like what the medicine is. They say like the south node is the bottle and the north node is the meeting, right? Like this pattern. It just felt so, again, just like really validating, but it made so much sense for me about why I felt so confused. Because, and this will make sense to people who understand a little bit about astrology, but there's something very paradoxical about my past life story where it's a Libra South node, but in the first house, which is ruled by Aries. And then what I'm moving into is an Aries North node, which is in the seventh house, which is ruled by Libra. So it's always kind of this dance of, and this is how I've experienced it, is like, when am I being too much in a committed relationship? When am I like being too much of a peacekeeper, right? This kind of dance between the part of me that wants to be like assertive and courageous. And that's what I'm kind of growing into. Whereas like in the past life pattern, it was more of like a peacekeeper, but someone that was probably more in a leadership role. So I could see myself like in a past life, like, oh, like I was in charge of a very peaceful group of people, right? And I didn't have to do a lot of that fighting to get my voice heard and all of that. And now it's like, okay, like you're going to have to level up this time and you're going to have to work on that in a very long-term way. So yeah, it just really made sense of this very paradoxical dance that happens inside of me. And it also helps point the way because so when you're looking for like the first step towards the remedy, the ruler of the North Node tells you something about like, what do you need to do first in order to work towards that? So if my soul is here to work on becoming more of a courageous leader in my long-term committed partnerships, my first step is going to be my Mars, which is in Leo in the 11th house, which really talks about like needing to put myself out there on the stage with my groups of people that really get me so that I can like kind of fill up on that validation and take some of that fire energy into the bigger medicine that I'm working on.
Can you talk just briefly about the term medicine that you've used a few times and like what that really means and why that word?
Yeah, I just might be my word of today for some
Okay.
reason. I guess like, words that we use to describe the North Node, the medicine, the remedy, the meeting, the cure. It's not really a cure. I think that's like probably too puritanical of a way to look at it. But that North Node is always going to be the remedy for whatever was unresolved from the past. And they're always exactly opposite of each other. So it really makes sense.
Right.
Like they're on two ends they're polarized basically.
Right.
Yeah.
Super interesting.
Yes. They're complementary also.
Yeah. And now I'm really curious about what the fuck my map says.
I know. I'm like, I should have had you send it anyway. I'll look at it for you later.
All right. What do I have to tell you? My birthday? And
Birthday,
time?
time, and place.
Okay. How specific on the place? Just the city?
Yeah, city's good.
Cool.
City's good. Time is more important. A lot can actually change in minutes.
Okay, I'm gonna have to
Yeah.
go find my birth certificate.
Right.
Cool.
So yeah, a lot can change in a few minutes in a birth chart, which is, it's tough. I didn't actually know my own birth time for a really long time. So I didn't have an accurate chart. And then my grandmother had like written it down in one of her journals. So I was like, thank God.
I was born at 3 a.m, but I'm pretty sure that it wasn't on the dot, so I'm gonna have to figure out what the minutes are. That's exciting. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming and talking about that with me. I know I definitely had parts that were like, what is this? and had that, a very a very different perspective, because I don't hear many people talking about this type of astrology, this evolutionary astrology, and certainly not in the context of IFS. And so it's very much shifted the way that I um, look at that, I think. And I mean, I still look at the hokey shit the same, but that's not going to change. But
That
this is
doesn't need
very
to
neat.
change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like the idea of there being more symbols and direction and tools for how to navigate this life that we're in, and
Yes.
the vehicles that we have for this life, you know.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for joining me and talking about all of this and going on the rabbit hole with me, or down the rabbit
Thank
hole.
you. Thank you so
Yeah.
much for inviting me. I love rabbit holes. So it's a fun space to be in with you.
Cool. Thank you. So I'll put all your info in the show notes for those that are interested in getting their birth chart read and consulting with you at Window Within. And I'm sure we will cross paths again.
We sure will.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you're interested in connecting with Heather or the guest today, please see the show notes for that info. If you'd like to be a guest on the Symmetry sessions, the link to send us your request is also in the show notes. If you enjoyed the show and you'd like to show some support, buy me a coffee at www.buymeacoffee.com/symmetrysesh, SYMMETRYSESH. You can make a small donation to help keep the episodes coming. And when you buy me a coffee, you're supporting small business professionals and podcasters. Every donation helps me to get better podcasting equipment and network to find new and interesting guests. Don't miss an episode. The Symmetry Sessions launches every first Friday of the month, so make sure you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Until next time.